My name is Barbara. For 22 years, that name was my sanctuary. It meant wife, mother, and a partner in a life I thought was written in stone. But I learned the hard way that stones can crumble, and even the person you share your morning coffee with can become a stranger by sunset. Before I share the story of how my world was shattered, and how my 12-year-old daughter, Emma, became the architect of our survival, I want to take a moment to look you in the eye and say thank you. In a world that moves so fast, the fact that you are choosing to spend your precious minutes here, listening to my heart, is a gift I do not take lightly. I know that many of you watching may be carrying your own invisible burdens. Perhaps you've been betrayed, or perhaps you feel like the dead weight someone else walked away from. Please let my story remind you. Betrayal is a fire, but you are the steel. It can either melt you, or it can forge you into something unbreakable. You are stronger than the shadows that try to claim you. If my journey touches a corner of your soul today, I humbly invite you to join our family by subscribing to Queen's Revenge. We are a community built on the belief that every queen, every mother, every daughter, every person, deserves her justice and her peace. And to those of you who have already hit that subscribe button and stood by us, may your lives be blessed with a boundless abundance of wealth, and may your homes be forever overflowing with a happiness so deep it heals every old wound. Your support is the light that keeps us moving forward. Now let me take you back to that Tuesday afternoon, when the sound of a suitcase zipper changed everything. The sun was hemorrhaging across our bedroom floor, a violent, bruised gold that spilled over the mahogany furniture we'd picked out together in a lifetime that no longer existed. The light didn't feel warm. It felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. Outside, the world was settling into the quiet hum of a Tuesday evening, but inside these four walls, the air had turned into something thick and unbreathable, like ash. I stood in the doorway, my hands trembling so violently, I had to tuck them into the sleeves of my cardigan. I watched him. Mark. The man who had occupied the space beside me for 8,030 days. He wasn't looking at me. He was focused on the suitcase laid open on our bed. The duvet still rumpled from a morning where I thought we were a family. The sound was what haunted me the most. The rhythmic thud-thud of folded shirts hitting the bottom of the luggage. The metallic clink of his cufflinks, the ones I bought him for our 10th anniversary, being tossed into a side pocket like common trash. It was the sound of a structural collapse. It was the sound of a house dying. What are you doing? The words left my throat like a fragile thread, so thin and frayed I wasn't sure they reached him. But they did. Mark paused, a navy blue blazer draped over his arm. For a heartbeat, the silence was so absolute I could hear the ticking of the clock on the mantel, the heartbeat of a home that was about to stop. He didn't turn around. He just sighed, a heavy, inconvenienced sound. I'm doing what I should have done years ago, Barbara. The bluntness of it was a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, my knees threatening to buckle. I leaned against the doorframe, my eyes tracing the familiar lines of his shoulders. I was blindsided. There is no other word for the sensation of the earth opening up beneath your feet while you're standing in your own sanctuary. Years ago, I whispered, my voice cracking. Mark, we had dinner last night. We talked about the garden. We talked about Emma's graduation. You kissed my forehead before you went to sleep. Finally, he turned. And that was when the true horror settled in. I had expected anger. I had expected guilt, or perhaps a flicker of the sorrow that was currently shredding my soul. Instead, I found a void. His eyes, once the harbor where I anchored my trust, were as cold as a winter sea. There was no recognition of our 22 years. I wasn't his wife in that moment. I was an obstacle he had finally decided to circumvent. Yesterday was a performance, he said, his voice terrifyingly steady. I'm tired of performing, Barbara. I'm tired of the weight of this life. I need to breathe. To breathe. I let out a jagged, hysterical laugh. You've been breathing my air for 2 decades. You've built a life on the foundation of my sacrifices. And now you're packing a bag like you're going on a business trip? Talk to me. Tell me who she is. He flinched then, just a fraction. It was the only confirmation I needed. The late nights at the office. The sudden obsession with a new cologne. The way he started shielding his phone like it held the secrets to the universe. I had pushed those domestic ghosts into the back of my mind, labeling them as paranoia, as the insecurities of a woman reaching middle age. I had protected him from my own suspicions. This isn't about anyone else, he lied, the words falling flat against the floor. This is about me. Don't, I snapped, a sudden spark of fire through the icy numbness. Don't insult my intelligence while you're destroying my heart. Does she know? Does she know you're leaving a 12-year-old girl behind? Does she know you're breaking the person who helped you build everything you have? Mark zipped the suitcase. The sound, a sharp mechanical shriek, felt like it was zipping up my chest, trapping my heart in a vacuum. He grabbed his handle and walked toward me. I didn't move. I wanted him to have to look at me, to smell the scent of the home he was discarding. You'll be fine, Barbara, he said, attempting a tone of pity that felt like acid on my skin. You've always been the strong one. The house is yours. I'll send for the rest of my things. The house is a shell, Mark. You're leaving a corpse. He brushed past me, his shoulder hitting mine. It wasn't a violent contact, but it felt like a total erasure. I followed him down the stairs, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood. I wanted to scream, to break the expensive vases, to wake the neighbors, to make the physical world match the internal devastation. But then I saw Emma. She was standing at the foot of the stairs, her small frame silhouetted against the kitchen light. She was holding a book, her thumb marking a page she would likely never finish. Her face was a mask of unnatural stillness. Mark stopped. For 3 seconds he looked at his daughter. I waited for the collapse. I waited for him to drop the bag and beg for her forgiveness. But the hollowed-out man I had married simply nodded. Be good for your mother, Emma, he said. The front door opened. The evening air rushed in, smelling of freshly cut grass and the impending storm. And then with a quiet final thud, he was gone. I stood in the foyer paralyzed. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was a predator. It began to consume the memories of birthdays, the echoes of laughter, the ghost of the man I thought I knew. I felt hollowed out, a vessel emptied of its purpose. I turned to Emma, my heart breaking all over again for the look in her eyes. I expected her to sob. I expected her to run to me so we could drown in our shared grief. Instead, Emma stepped forward into the dying light. She didn't look like a child. She looked like a judge. She walked to the window, watching his car pull out of the driveway, the red taillights disappearing into the darkness like 2 fading embers. She turned back to me. Her face didn't hold the jagged edges of my own despair. There was a strange, cold clarity in her gaze, a sharpness that flickered beneath the surface of her 12-year-old innocence. Mom, she said, her voice devoid of the tremor that was currently rattling my bones. Oh, baby, I'm so sorry, I choked out, reaching for her. I'll fix this. I'll call him. He's confused. Emma didn't move into my embrace. She just looked at the computer sitting on the hallway table, then back at me. A small, almost imperceptible smirk ghosted across her lips. Not a smile of happiness, but a grimace of tactical satisfaction. Don't worry, Mom, she whispered, and for the first time that night, the coldness in the house felt like it belonged to us instead of him. I handled it. I stared at her, my mind unable to process the weight of those words. I was a woman drowning in rhythmic betrayal, but my daughter was standing on the shore, holding a rope I hadn't even seen her weave. The house was dying, yes. But as I looked at Emma, I realized that something new, something fierce and formidable, was being born in the ruins. The click of the front door was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It wasn't a slam. It was a surgical severance, a final metallic snap that signaled the end of my life as I knew it. For a long, paralyzed minute, I stood in the foyer, my breath hitching in my chest. The silence that followed was heavy, an invasive species that rushed into the vacuum Mark had left behind, filling the corners of the house with a cold, mocking emptiness. My feet were bare, and as I moved toward the kitchen, the hardwood floors felt like sheets of ice against my skin. I wasn't just cold. I was becoming skeletal, stripped of the warmth of certainty. My mind was a frantic bird, battering itself against the cage of my ribs. Mark's parting words, his demand for his half, echoed like a threat. His half, I whispered to the empty air. The arithmetic of a dying marriage is always cruel, but I knew our math. I knew our sacrifices. I reached the kitchen island where my laptop sat, its silver lid glowing under the recessed lights. My fingers felt like lead as I flipped it open. The screen flared to life, a blinding white rectangle that seemed too bright for a world that had just gone dark. I typed the password, the date we bought this house, a date that had once been sacrosanct, now a bitter string of numbers. The bank's homepage loaded with agonizing slowness. I held my breath, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my sternum. Please, I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Please let him have left enough for her. I clicked on the Accounts tab. The screen refreshed. Checking. $247.83. Savings, $0. I felt a roar in my ears, a tidal wave of blood rushing to my head. I refreshed the page, my hand spasming on the trackpad. I did it again. And again. The numbers remained stubbornly, violently anemic. But the true horror, the stinging clarity of betrayal, lay one click further down. I scrolled to the sub-account. The one we had opened the day we brought Emma home from the hospital. The one labeled Emma's college fund. $0. $75,000. 12 years of disciplined saving. Every bonus Mark had ever received, every tax refund, every check my parents had sent for Emma's birthdays, every dollar she'd earned from her paper route and tutoring that she'd proudly handed over to save for the future. Gone. It wasn't just a withdrawal. It was a fiscal assassination. Mark hadn't just left me for a mistress. He had reached into the future and strangled our daughter's dreams before they could draw breath. He had liquidated her late nights of studying, her straight-A report cards, and her aspirations for medical school to fund a fresh start with a woman named Rebecca. No, I gasped, the word catching in my throat like a shard of glass. No, no, no. I opened the transaction history. The transfers had been made 3 days ago. While he was sitting across from me at the dinner table, smiling and complaining about the neighbor's dog, he had been systematically gutting our child's security. He had emptied the accounts into a private offshore holding, leaving us with barely enough to cover a week's worth of groceries. He didn't just leave. He robbed us of our ability to survive his absence. An evaporated future. That was what stared back at me from the glowing LED screen. I saw Emma's face in my mind, not the stoic, judge-like figure from the stairs, but the little girl who used to count her coins into a piggy bank. He had stolen the very ground she stood on. A shadow moved at the edge of my vision. Emma was standing in the archway of the kitchen. She hadn't gone to bed. She was still wearing her school uniform, her backpack slumped on the floor behind her. She looked so small against the vast emptiness of the house, yet her expression was terrifyingly old. He took it, didn't he? She asked. Her voice wasn't the high-pitched wail of a child who had lost her father. It was the flat, resonant tone of someone reciting a weather report. I couldn't look her in the eye. I slammed the laptop shut, as if I could hide the digital bloodstains. Emma, honey, go to bed. I'll fix it. I'll call the bank. I'll call a lawyer. I'll find him. You won't find the money, Mom, she said, stepping into the kitchen. The light caught the sharp angles of her face. He's been moving it for weeks. Small increments first, then the bulk of it on Friday through Rebecca's firm's server. I froze. The air in the room seemed to crystallize. What did you just say? Emma walked over to the island and hopped onto the bar stool. She didn't look at the closed laptop. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the depth of the void Mark had left. It wasn't in the house, it was in the shift of my daughter's soul. I've been watching his history, Mom, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a blade. He wasn't as careful as he thought. He used the same password for his private email as he did for his gym membership. Rebecca 2026. The name felt like a physical sting. My husband's mistress was the key to our destruction. Emma, you shouldn't have seen those things. I stammered, my maternal instincts finally kicking in through the shock. This isn't for you to handle. This is adult business. It stopped being adult business when he stole my money, Mom, she countered, her eyes flashing with a cold, predatory intelligence. He thought I was just a kid playing Minecraft. He didn't realize I was monitoring the IP addresses. He didn't realize I'd already mapped out Rebecca's offshore accounts. She reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a small black USB drive. She laid it on the counter between us. It looked like a tiny plastic coffin. What is that? I asked, afraid to touch it. The reason he won't get to keep a single cent, Emma said. A small chilling smirk returned to her face. The same one I'd seen when Mark walked out. I told you, Mom. I handled it. He thinks he's vanished with a fortune. He doesn't realize he's left behind a trail of breadcrumbs made of fire. I looked from the USB drive to my 12-year-old daughter. I wanted to cry for the loss of her innocence, for the fact that she had spent her nights learning the language of cyber warfare instead of dreaming of her first dance. But as I looked at the $0 balance reflected in the back of my mind, I felt a different emotion rising through the grief. It was a dark, elegant hunger. Mark had committed a fiscal assassination on our family. He had left us for dead in a house filled with ghosts. But as I reached out and curled my fingers around the cold plastic of the USB drive, I realized he had made one fatal mistake. He had forgotten that he wasn't the only architect in this family, and he had no idea what his daughter had been building in the dark. "Show me," I whispered. Emma opened the laptop. "With pleasure, Mom. Let's look at what Mark and Rebecca are doing in Florida right now. They're celebrating. They think they're safe." Her fingers danced across the keys with the grace of a pianist. "Let's show them what happens when you steal from a Patterson." The screen flickered, and the hunt began. The kitchen light felt clinical, a harsh fluorescent interrogation that exposed the shattered remnants of my pride. I collapsed. It wasn't a graceful faint, it was a structural failure, my knees hitting the cold linoleum with a dull thud that vibrated through my teeth. I sat there on the floor, leaning my back against the dishwasher, my breath coming in shallow, jagged gasps. The image of the zeroed-out college fund was burned into my retinas like a solar eclipse, a dark, empty circle where Emma's future used to be. I felt a sudden, desperate urge to shield her. Even in my state of total disintegration, the instinct of the mother remained. I had to hide the wound. I had to pretend the blood wasn't real. "Emma," I choked out, staring at the baseboards. "Go to your room. Please. Don't look at this. I'll call your Aunt Janet. We'll find a way. We'll take out a loan. We'll fix it." I looked up, expecting to see a child trembling in the doorway, a girl whose world had just been leveled by the man she called Dad. Instead, I saw a stranger. Emma was leaning against the granite countertop, a ceramic cereal bowl cradled in her hands. The spoon clicked rhythmically against the side, clink, clink, clink. A steady metronomic sound that felt impossibly mundane in the wake of our destruction. She wasn't crying. Her eyes weren't red, and her lower lip didn't quiver. She stood there with a calculated calm that made the hair on my arms stand up. She took a slow bite of cereal, swallowed, and looked at me with a gaze of precocious steel. "Mom," she said, her voice dropping into a register that was far too low, far too steady for a 12-year-old. "Stop hyperventilating. You're going to pass out, and I need you to be conscious for the next part." I stared at her, my mouth agape. "Emma, he took everything. Your college money. The savings. He's with that woman. He's gone." Emma set the cereal bowl down on the counter with a soft, deliberate snick. She didn't move toward me to offer a hug. She didn't seek comfort. Instead, she walked over to the laptop I had just slammed shut and flipped it open with a single fluid motion. "Don't worry, Mom," she whispered, and the words were cold enough to frost the air. I handled it. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning swept over me. It was an unsettling primordial fear, the kind a mother feels when she realizes her child has grown a set of claws she didn't know existed. My daughter, the girl who still had a collection of stuffed elephants on her bed, was looking at the digital ruins of our life with the detached interest of a coroner. "What do you mean, handled it?" I managed to stand, my legs still trembling. "Emma, this is identity theft. This is embezzlement. Mark, your father, he's a professional accountant. He knows how to hide money. You're a child." "He was a professional accountant, Mom," Emma corrected, her fingers beginning to fly across the keyboard. "But he's also arrogant. He thinks digital footprint is just a buzzword. He thinks that because he deleted his browser history on the home computer, he's invisible." She turned the laptop toward me. The screen was no longer showing the bank's homepage. It was a black terminal window filled with scrolling lines of white and green code, a language I didn't speak, but one she seemed to command with terrifying fluency. "I didn't just find his emails, Mom. I mirrored his phone 3 weeks ago," she explained, her face illuminated by the ghostly glow of the screen. Every text he sent to Rebecca, every secret bank transfer, every mortgage application for that house in Boca Raton. I have it all. I didn't just watch him steal the money. I watched him decide which account to take it from first. You watched him. My voice was a horrified whisper. Emma, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let him walk out that door? She paused, her hands hovering over the keys. For a fleeting second, the precocious steel flickered, and I saw a glimpse of the wounded child beneath. Because if I told you, you would have confronted him. You would have cried and he would have panicked. He would have moved the money to a harder-to-reach offshore account before I could finish the shadow link. The what? The shadow link, she said, the coldness returning. It's a script I wrote. It doesn't stop the transfer. Follows it. Mark thinks he moved $75,000 into a private account in Rebecca's name. He thinks he's looking at a balance of $75,000 right now. She hit the enter key with a sharp, final click. But he's not, she said, a small dark smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. In approximately 10 minutes, when he tries to use his new debit card to pay for their celebratory dinner at that steakhouse in Jacksonville, the card will decline. Not because there's no money, but because I flagged the transaction as potential terrorist financing through a back-channel tip to the bank's fraud department. I felt the room spin. Emma, you can't just. I can, she said. And I did. But that's just the quiet before the storm, Mom. The money is frozen in a legal limbo that only we have the keys to unlock. He can see the numbers, but he can't touch them. He's broke, Mom. He just doesn't know it yet. I looked at my daughter, and I felt a profound aching sorrow. Mark hadn't just stolen her college fund. He had forced her to become a monster to survive him. He had stripped away her right to be soft, to be vulnerable, to be a child who trusts her father. He had turned our home into a battlefield, and Emma had become the most dangerous soldier on the field. Who are you? I whispered, reaching out to touch her shoulder. Emma didn't flinch, but she didn't lean into my hand either. She just looked back at the screen, her eyes reflecting the scrolling code. I'm the person he should have been afraid of, she said. He thought he was leaving a housewife and a little girl. He didn't realize he was leaving the two people who knew his every weakness. She scrolled down, opening a new folder labeled Rebecca's Secret. Now, Emma said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hum. Do you want to see why Rebecca's firm is about to have a very surprise audit tomorrow morning? It turns out, Dad isn't the only one who likes to repurpose funds. I sank into the chair beside her, the grief still there, but now it was being overtaken by a cold, sharp adrenaline. I looked at the screen, then at my daughter's profile. The power had shifted. The hierarchy of our home had been rewritten in ones and zeros. I was still the mother, and I would still protect her with every breath in my body. But as the first stage of Emma's digital trap began to snap shut hundreds of miles away, I realized that my role had changed. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was the accomplice to a genius. Show me, I said, my voice finally finding its strength. Show me everything. 7 days had passed since the air in our home was replaced by a heavy, suffocating stillness. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like the architecture of a ghost, a skeletal frame of hallways and rooms haunted by the memory of a man who had walked out with our lives in his luggage. Every corner was a trap, the dent in the sofa where he used to sit, the lingering scent of his cedarwood cologne in the hallway, the half-finished book on his nightstand that mocked the very idea of a happy ending. I found myself wandering through this mausoleum of a marriage, performing useless, repetitive tasks. I was standing in the laundry room, the dryer humming a low, mournful tune that vibrated through my bones. I reached inside and pulled out a stack of Mark's shirts. They were warm, soft, and smelled of the lavender detergent he liked. My hands moved on autopilot, smoothing the fabric, aligning the seams, folding them into perfect, sharp rectangles. It was a pathetic habit, a reflex of a wife who had been trained for 22 years to care for a man who didn't exist. I was folding the clothes of a stranger, a thief who had left me with nothing but a drawer full of cotton and a heart full of glass. Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging, as I pressed my face into a navy polo. It was the rhythmic betrayal of my own body. My mind knew he was a monster, but my hand still wanted to make sure his collars were straight. From upstairs the sound began again. Tap, 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 tap. It was a staccato rhythm, sharp and relentless, cutting through the silence of the house like a surgeon's scalpel. It was the sound of Emma's digital vigil. Since that first night, she had barely left her room. She emerged only for meals, her face a mask of pale, focused determination, before retreating back to her desk. While I was downstairs drowning in the physical wreckage of our past, Emma was upstairs dismantling our future's enemies. The phone in my pocket buzzed. I wiped my eyes and answered. It was Janet, my sister. Barbara? Honey, you didn't answer my last 3 texts. Janet's voice was warm, dripping with the kind of pity that makes you feel like you're already buried. I was worried. Have you eaten today? I'm folding laundry, Janet, I said, my voice sounding thin and metallic. Mark's laundry. Janet sighed a long, weary sound. Barb, stop. Put the shirts down. You need to get angry. You need to scream. Remember when Dad left us? You stayed in bed for a month, but I got so mad I broke every vase in the house. You have to let it out or it'll eat you alive. I looked at the stack of folded shirts. I wasn't angry yet. I was just hollow. Emma is the angry one, I whispered, though I knew that wasn't the right word for it. Anger was hot and chaotic. What Emma was doing was ice cold. How is she? Janet asked, her tone shifting to concern. She hasn't called her cousins. She hasn't posted anything online. Is she crying? She needs to cry, Barbara. She's only 12. She's working, I said. Working on what? School starts in 3 weeks. She's working on Mark, I said, and the silence on Janet's end was deafening. I didn't elaborate. How could I explain that my daughter had transformed into a silent assassin, hunting her father through the dark fibers of the internet? I hung up shortly after, unable to bear the weight of Janet's normal expectations of grief. I climbed the stairs, the wood creaking under my feet like a warning. I stopped outside Emma's door. The clicking was faster now, a frantic mechanical heartbeat. I pushed the door open quietly. The room was dark, save for the blue-white glare of the laptop screen reflecting in Emma's glasses. She looked older than she had a week ago. Her shoulders were set, her jaw tight. She didn't look like a girl who needed to cry. She looked like a sentinel guarding a border. Emma, I said softly. You need to sleep, sweetheart. It's almost midnight. I can't sleep yet, Mom, she said, her eyes never leaving the screen. Rebecca just logged into her company's remote portal. She's trying to scrub the internal ledgers before the auditors arrive tomorrow morning. She's panicking. I walked over and stood behind her. What are you doing to her, Emmy? Emma scrolled through a series of spreadsheets, her fingers moving with a terrifying fluid grace. I'm not doing anything she didn't already do to herself. I'm just making sure the right people see it. Look. She pointed to a line of numbers. Rebecca has been skimming off her clients' investment portfolios for 24 months. She hides it by creating phantom losses in their quarterly reports. She used that money to pay the down payment on the Florida house. She didn't just help Dad steal my college fund. She used her expertise to launder it. The tactical deconstruction of Rebecca's life was splayed out before me in cold, unforgiving rows of data. Emma had mapped out Rebecca's bank accounts, her work history, her family connections. She had found the rot in the woman's soul and was now holding a mirror up to it. She thinks she's the smart one, Emma whispered, a ghost of that dark smirk appearing on her face. She thinks she outplayed you, Mom. She thinks she won a prize. And Mark? I asked, my heart aching. Is he happy? Emma clicked a window to the side, revealing a GPS tracker on a map of Jacksonville. A small blue dot was moving slowly down a coastal highway. He's currently in a Motel 6. He tried to check into the Ritz-Carlton 4 hours ago, but his special account was flagged for suspicious activity. He spent the last 3 hours on hold with the bank, trying to explain why his money is frozen. She looked up at me then, and the distance between us felt like an ocean. I wanted to reach out and pull her into my lap, to tell her that we didn't need the money, that I just wanted my little girl back, the one who cared about science fairs and soccer practice. But the girl sitting in front of me was a creature of the digital vigil, forged in the fire of her father's betrayal. Mom, she said, sensing my hesitation. Are you afraid of me? The question cut through me. I looked at her pale face, her sharp eyes, the way she had sacrificed her own childhood to protect us. I thought about the laundry downstairs, the shirts I was still folding for a man who didn't love us. No, I said, and I realized it was the truth. I wasn't afraid of her. I was afraid for her. I'm not afraid, Emmy. I'm sorry you have to be this person. Someone had to be, she said simply, turning back to the screen. The clicking resumed. Tap, 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 tap. I left the room and walked back downstairs to the laundry. I looked at the stack of Mark's shirts. I picked them up, walked to the back door, and threw them into the trash can in the alley. I didn't fold the last one. I let it fall into the dirt, unironed and discarded. The architecture of a ghost was still there, but as I stood in the dark kitchen, listening to the rhythmic heartbeat of my daughter's work from above, I realized that the house wasn't just haunted anymore. It was armed. The morning air was deceptively sweet, carrying the scent of honeysuckle through the open window of the hallway. It was a cruel contrast to the sour rot that had settled into the foundation of my life. I was in Emma's room, a place that used to smell of vanilla candles and old library books, attempting to find her misplaced history textbook. I reached under her desk, my hand brushing against a stack of papers that had slipped behind the radiator. I pulled them out, expecting to see sketches of biology cells or math equations. Instead, I found a printed email thread. The first thing that caught my eye was the date, July 14th. 6 weeks before Mark left. The second was the recipient, Rebecca Sterling. I sank onto the edge of Emma's bed, the paper crinkling in my white-knuckled grip. I shouldn't have read it. I should have respected the privacy I'd always afforded my daughter. But the first line was a serrated blade that tore through my restraint. "Don't worry, babe," Mark had written. "The dead weight won't be an issue. I'm finalizing the credit applications today. Barbara is so distracted with the house, she signs whatever I put in front of her. By the time they realize the debt is in their names, we'll be long gone." The room tilted. I felt the bile rise in my throat. Dead weight. 22 years of shared morning coffees, of holding his hand through his father's funeral, of building a sanctuary from nothing, reduced to 2 words of discarded debris. This was the paper trail of a traitor, a meticulously documented map of our execution. I wasn't ready to show you that one yet. I jumped, the paper fluttering to the floor. Emma was standing in the doorway, her backpack still slung over her shoulder from her morning walk. She didn't look surprised to find me there. She looked disappointed. Not in me but in the timing. "Emma," I whispered, gesturing to the floor. "What is this? What does he mean by debt?" She walked into the room, closed the door and locked it. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home felt final. She sat down at her desk and flipped open her laptop. "I was going to wait until I had the final injunction papers drafted, Mom. You're still in the grief phase. This is rage phase material." "I am past phases, Emma," I said, my voice trembling with a terrifying new frequency. Show me exactly what he did." Emma took a deep breath, her forensic heart visible in the steady set of her shoulders. She didn't offer a platitude. She clicked an icon on her desktop, a folder innocently labeled Science Fair Project 2026. She opened it. Inside were dozens of subfolders, a digital blueprint of a life I didn't recognize. There were spreadsheets of Mark's second phone records, calls made at 2 a.m. from the basement. There were high-resolution scans of Rebecca's company ledgers, showing the exact moments she had siphoned client funds. But it was the folder labeled Identity/Asset Management that broke me. "Mark didn't just take the $75,000, Mom," Emma said, her voice clinical and cold. "That was just his walking around money. He used your social security number and my minor status identity to secure 3 different high-interest personal loans. He forged your signature on a second mortgage application for this house." She opened a document. It was a loan summary. Total debt, $212,400. He and Rebecca used that money to buy the Florida property outright in her name, Emma continued, her eyes reflecting the scrolling numbers. "The plan was for them to live in a debt-free mansion while you and I were left holding the bag for over $200,000. He wanted us to be evicted, Mom. He wanted our credit scores destroyed, so we couldn't even rent an apartment to hide in." The realization hit me like a physical weight, a crushing pressure on my chest. It wasn't just abandonment. It was a planned, systematic destruction. He had intended to leave his wife and child in a state of financial homelessness. He had looked at his 12-year-old daughter and decided her identity was nothing more than a tool for his own comfort. He was going to ruin us. I breathed, the tears finally falling hot and thick. He wasn't just leaving. He was erasing us. He thought he was, Emma said. She clicked out of the loan document and opened a terminal window. But that's where the shadow link comes in. I didn't just follow the money, Mom. I intercepted the debt. What do you mean? I've been rerouting the loan verification emails for weeks, Emma explained, a dark light dawning in her eyes. He thinks the loans are finalized and the money is clean. But I've flagged every single one of those fraudulent applications with the creditors. I've attached the IP addresses from his second phone and Rebecca's office computer. The debt isn't ours, Mom. Because I caught it before the grace period ended, the liability is shifting back to him and the cosigner. She looked at me, and for a moment the 12-year-old was gone entirely. In her place was a silent digital executioner. Rebecca co-signed those loans to help him, Emma whispered. She thought she was being clever, securing their future. She didn't realize she was signing her own financial death warrant. When the fraud departments finish their investigation, which I'm helping them with anonymously, they won't come for us. They'll come for them. All $200,000 of it. I looked at the folder labeled Science Fair Project. It was a masterpiece of retribution. My daughter hadn't just been typing. She had been building a cage. Emma, I said, reaching out to touch her hand. Her skin was cool, her pulse steady. This is a lot for a child to carry. I'm not a child anymore, Mom, she said, and the sadness in those words was sharper than any betrayal Mark could have ever devised. Dad took that away when he put a price tag on my name. He traded my childhood for a house in Florida. So, I'm trading his freedom for our security. I looked back at the screen, at the digital blueprint of my husband's greed. The man I had loved was a fiction, a ghost I had nourished with my own devotion. But the girl sitting next to me, the one with the forensic heart and the nerves of ice, she was real. She was the only thing in this world that was still standing. I stood up, wiped my face, and pulled the chair closer to her. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my marrow, but it was being eclipsed by a cold, elegant resolve. You said you were drafting injunction papers, I said, my voice finally steady. Show me how I can help. If we're going to finish this, I want to be the one who signs the final line. Emma looked at me, and for the first time in a week she didn't smirk. She reached out and squeezed my hand. Okay, Mom, she said. Let's start with the embezzlement logs. Rebecca has a meeting with her boss in 4 hours. I think it's time we send that anonymous email. The clicking began again, but this time, I wasn't just listening from the hallway. I was right there beside her, watching the paper trail of a traitor burn in the light of our shared silent fury. The clock on the wall ticked with a new predatory rhythm. It was 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, the exact moment Rebecca Sterling usually took her first artisan coffee break at the prestigious accounting firm of Sterling and Associates. But today the caffeine wouldn't be the thing making her heart race. Watch this, Mom, Emma whispered. She had patched into the firm's public security feed. It was a grainy, overhead view of a sleek, glass-walled office, but the tension was high definition. We saw her. Rebecca. She was blonde, polished, and wore a suit that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage. She was laughing at something on her phone, likely a text from Mark, when the door to the senior partner's office opened. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They didn't look like clients. They looked like an ending. Who are they? I asked, my heart hammering. Internal auditors from the state board, Emma said, her voice devoid of pity. And those two behind them? That's corporate security. They're there to make sure she doesn't touch her keyboard again. On the screen, the color drained from Rebecca's face. It was a slow-motion collapse of predictable vanity. She reached for her mouse, perhaps to delete a file or close a tab, but one of the men moved with surgical precision, placing a hand over hers. Within seconds, they were escorting her toward the elevators. She didn't have her purse. She didn't have her phone. She only had the sudden, crushing weight of her own crimes. How did you get them there so fast? I asked, turning to my daughter. Emma leaned back in her chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in her irises. People are so predictable, Mom. They think they're geniuses because they know how to move numbers, but they're lazy with their souls. Rebecca used the same password for everything. Sterling 2011. Her last name and the year she graduated from college. It was on her LinkedIn, her Instagram, even her high school reunion page. She shook her head, a gesture of pure intellectual disdain. It was the weaponization of a password. Once I had that, I had her life. I didn't even have to hack her. I just walked through the front door she left wide open. I found the logs of the money she skimmed from the elderly clients, the ones who didn't check their statements because they trusted the Sterling name. But the auditors, that was just the beginning, wasn't it? I sensed there was more. The air in the room felt electric, charged with the energy of a trap that was still snapping shut. Rebecca's biggest weakness isn't her greed, Emma said, clicking open a sent mail folder. It's her father, Dr. Robert Sterling, the man who built that firm. The man who values legacy above everything else. My breath hitched. Emma, what did you do? I sent him a very detailed package, she said. Not from an anonymous email. That's too easy to ignore. I sent a physical courier to his surgical suite this morning. It contained the screenshots of his daughter talking about him behind his back, calling him a senile ATM, and the full evidence of her embezzlement from his favorite clients. I included the forged loan documents Mark signed using our names, which she notarized. The surgical precision of Emma's strike was breathtaking. She hadn't just gotten Rebecca fired. She had dismantled the woman's entire support system. She had turned her own father against her. And Mark? I asked. The name still tasted like ash. Mark is currently sitting in a parked car outside a Starbucks in Savannah, trying to use their free Wi-Fi because his phone data plan just got suspended for non-payment, Emma said, her fingers dancing across the keys to bring up a new window. I just sent him a ping. Watch. She hit a key. On a side monitor, a chat window popped up. It was an encrypted messenger. A single message appeared, sent from an untraceable account. Do you like the view from the Motel 6, Mark? Rebecca just got escorted out in handcuffs. She's telling them it was all your idea. The three dots indicating a reply appeared almost instantly. They danced for a long time, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Mark was panicking. The predator was realizing he had stepped into a room with no doors. Who is this? He finally typed. Sarah, is that you? Stop this. You're breaking the law. Emma didn't type back. She just looked at me. Her expression a mix of cold satisfaction and a lingering shadowed hurt. He thinks it's you, Mom, she whispered. He can't even imagine that a child could do this to him. He thinks you're the one hunting him. Let him think that, I said, a dark primal strength rising within me. I took the laptop from her and placed it on my lap. If he wants to believe I'm the one who found the rot, then I'll give him exactly what he's looking for. I began to type, my own predictable vanity replaced by a mother's iron resolve. It's not Sarah, Mark, I wrote. Sarah's gone. You killed her in that bedroom. This is the ghost of everything you threw away. And we're just getting started. I hit send. Emma watched me, a small genuine smile finally touching her lips. It wasn't the dark smirk of a hacker. It was the look of a daughter seeing her mother stand up for the first time in a decade. What's next, Emmy? I asked. Next. She tilted her head, her eyes flashing. Next, we talked to the bank in Florida. The one that's about to realize their gold standard mortgage applicant is actually a fugitive with no job and a frozen bank account. I think it's time they meet the real owners of that $75,000. The house was silent, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a war room. And for the first time since the zip of that suitcase, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like the storm. The air in the kitchen felt thin, as if the oxygen were being consumed by the glowing blue light of the laptop. Emma sat perfectly still, her small fingers poised over the keys like a pianist awaiting a conductor's signal. On the screen, a PDF document was pulled up, a formal mortgage application for a sun-drenched villa in Palm Beach. My eyes scanned the document, searching for the lie I knew was there. I found it at the bottom of page 4, under the section for co-applicant/dependent credit collateral. There, in black and white, was Emma's social security number. Beside it, a forged digital signature that mimicked my own handwriting with sickening accuracy. He didn't just take the money, Mom, Emma whispered, her voice a flat line of precocious steel. He sold me. He used my clean credit history, my entire future identity, as a trust asset to lower his interest rate. He told the bank I was a beneficiary of a non-existent trust fund he'd set up. The room seemed to tilt. This wasn't just a husband leaving a wife. This was a stolen lineage. Mark had looked at our daughter, the child he'd taught to ride a bike, the girl whose scraped knees he'd bandaged, and he hadn't seen a person. He'd seen a blank slate of credit, a fresh, untainted number he could burn to ash to build a fireplace for his mistress. He stole her name. I breathed, the words tasting like copper. He took the one thing she owned that was entirely hers. It's called synthetic identity theft, Emma said, her eyes never leaving the screen. She was already opening a new window, a terminal that looked like a digital heartbeat. It's harder to detect because children don't check their credit reports. He figured by the time I applied for my first student loan at 18, the Florida house would be paid off or sold, and the glitch would be gone. He was gambling with my life, Mom. He put my future on the roulette wheel, and bet it all on Rebecca. I looked at Emma. Really looked at her. She wasn't slouching. Her back was a straight, uncompromising line. There were no tears in her eyes, only the flickering reflection of data streams. I realized then that I wasn't looking at my little girl anymore. I was looking at a soldier, a weary high-tech infantry woman who had crawled through the mud of her father's secrets to save us from a landmine we hadn't even known was buried beneath our feet. It was a forged legacy. Every memory of him, the way he tucked her in, the way he bragged about her grades, felt like a premeditated lie. Was he ever a father? Or was he just a caretaker for a financial asset he was waiting to liquidate? How do we stop it? I asked, my voice sharpening. How do we get your name back? We don't just get it back, Mom. We have to perform a total identity restoration, Emma said. She began to type, the clack-clack-clack of the keys sounding like gunfire in the quiet house. I've already drafted the fraud affidavits. I've compiled the IP logs from the nights he used the home Wi-Fi to access the loan portal. I'm tagging every single document with a criminal misuse flag. She hit a key, and a map of the United States appeared. A red pulse began to throb over a small town in Florida. The bank in Palm Beach just received a high-priority fraud alert from the Social Security Administration's automated verification system, Emma explained. In 5 minutes, their legal department will realize the collateral for Mark's $200,000 loan is a 12-year-old girl. The mortgage won't just be denied. It will be voided ab initio. Existing funds will be seized as evidence of a felony. The cold math of cruelty. Mark had used numbers to erase us, so Emma was using numbers to erase him. And the $200,000 in debt? I asked, thinking of the dead weight he'd called us. Since the loans were secured through identity theft of a minor, the liability is non-transferable to us, Emma said, a small grim smile touching her lips. But since Rebecca co-signed as the primary guarantor to verify the household income, the bank will hold her personally responsible for the attempted fraudulent draw. She's not just losing her job, Mom. She's inheriting a debt that she can never discharge in bankruptcy because it's tied to a criminal act. I leaned back, my head thumping against the kitchen chair. The betrayal was a physical ache, a weight in my marrow, but the justice was a sharp, cold tonic. I looked at the screen again. Mark's world was a series of falling dominoes, each one more devastating than the last. He had tried to leave us with nothing, but in his arrogance, he had tied himself to a woman who was now a sinking ship, and he had handed the controls of that ship to the daughter he'd underestimated. He's going to go to jail, isn't he? I asked. Emma paused. She looked at me, and for a fleeting second, the soldier vanished, and I saw the 12-year-old girl who still missed the idea of her dad. If he's lucky, Mom, he'll just end up homeless. If he's unlucky, the feds are going to want to know how he got access to those Social Security files. She turned back to the screen. I'm initiating the scrub phase now. I'm locking your credit, my credit, and the house title. From this moment on, Mark Patterson doesn't exist to the financial world. He's a ghost with a suitcase. I stood up and walked behind her, wrapping my arms around her narrow shoulders. She didn't lean back. She was still on duty, but she reached up and squeezed my forearm. I've got us, Mom, she whispered. I looked at the back of her head, at the ponytail that still seemed too young for the weight of the world she was carrying. My heart broke for the mother I used to be. The one who thought her only job was to make sure her daughter felt safe. But it swelled for the woman I was becoming. The one who was learning that sometimes safety isn't something you're given. Sometimes it's something you have to take back one line of code at a time. The house was bathed in the deceptive peace of a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of quiet that usually hummed with the mundane rhythm of a life I no longer possessed. I was standing in the kitchen, my hands submerged in warm soapy water, staring out at the oak tree in the backyard. I was thinking about the 22 years I'd spent nurturing a ghost, when the silence was shattered. My phone, resting on the granite counter, began to vibrate with a violent, jagged persistence. The name on the caller ID was a serrated edge mark. I didn't pick up immediately. I dried my hands with a deliberate, slow precision, my heart thumping a steady, heavy beat against my ribs. Across the kitchen island, Emma looked up from her laptop. She didn't say a word, but her intelligent eyes, those deep, knowing pools of precocious steel, locked onto mine. She gave me a single, imperceptible nod. She was ready. The trap was fully pressurized. I swiped the screen. I didn't say hello. I just waited. Barbara? Barbara, answer me. Mark's voice didn't sound like the man who had zipped his suitcase with cold finality a week ago. It was high-pitched, vibrating with a frantic desperation that made my skin crawl. Gone was the calculated architect of our ruin. In his place was a man standing in the middle of a crumbling glass house, watching the shards fall. I'm here, Mark, I said. My voice was a flat, cool stone. Surprised even me. What did you do? What the hell did you do? He was screaming now, the sound distorted by the cheap speaker of whatever burner phone he was using. My accounts? They're gone, Barbara. Frozen. I tried to get gas in South Carolina and the card was declined for fraudulent activity. I'm stuck at a rest stop like a common vagrant. I leaned back against the counter, watching Emma's fingers move silently across her keys. She was live-tracking the call, her screen showing a map of a lonesome highway exit. I didn't do anything, Mark. I lied, and the lie tasted like vintage wine. You're the one who moved the money. You're the one who handled the accounts. I'm just the dead weight. Remember. Don't play games with me, he roared. Rebecca. She's been fired. Escorted out by security. Her father. Dr. Sterling called me an hour ago threatening to have me arrested for corrupting his daughter. He said someone sent him files. Someone sent him everything. He paused, his breathing heavy and ragged over the line. I could almost see him, pacing beside a trash can at a humid rest stop, sweating through his expensive blazer, realization finally dawning that his fresh start was a funeral pyre. The bank called about the Florida mortgage, he whispered, his voice cracking. They're talking about identity theft, Barbara. They mentioned Emma's social security number. They said the feds are flagging the application as a federal crime. Tell me you didn't call them. Tell me you didn't ruin this for us. For us. I let the words hang in the air, a heavy, suffocating weight. There is no us, Mark. There's you, and there's the wreckage you left behind. You didn't just leave me. You robbed your daughter. You stole her name to buy a house for another woman. Did you really think the universe would just let you walk away clean? I was going to pay it back, he screamed, the sound of a predator realizing it had become the prey. It was an investment. We were going to be rich, Sarah. I did it for all of us. Emma flinched at the sound of my name, the name he used when he was trying to manipulate the woman I used to be. She looked at me, her gaze sharpening, urging me to finish it. You're not talking to Sarah anymore, Mark, I said, and the poetic justice of the moment felt like a physical warmth. Sarah died the moment you emptied that college fund. The woman you're talking to now is the one who's watching your world burn. And I have to tell you, the view is spectacular. I'll sue you, he whimpered, the frantic desperation turning into a pathetic, hollow threat. I'll tell them you're behind the hacking. I'll tell them you're crazy. With what lawyer, Mark? You can't even pay for a tank of gas, I said. Every cent you touched is radioactive now. Every document you forged is a nail in your coffin. You thought you were the smart one. You thought you were playing chess while we were playing house. I looked at Emma. She hit a final key and a notification popped up on my phone. A copy of the police report she just finalized under an anonymous tip. "Goodbye, Mark," I said, my voice as sharp as a guillotine. "I'd tell you to go home, but you don't have one anymore." I hung up. The silence that returned to the kitchen was different this time. It wasn't the heavy morning silence of a week ago. It was light. It was clean. Emma closed her laptop with a soft, satisfied snap. She looked at me, and for a fleeting second the soldier vanished. She was just a girl again, a girl who had saved her mother from a monster. "He's at the rest stop on I-95, exit 42, Emma said, her voice returning to its calculated calm. "The state troopers just got the stolen vehicle report. I filed for the car he's driving. Since he used joint funds that were flagged as fraudulent to pay the last 2 lease installments, the car is technically a crime scene now." I sat down at the table, my legs finally giving way, but my heart was soaring. I looked at my daughter, this magnificent, terrifying architect of retribution, and I felt a fierce primal pride. "You handled it, Emmy," I whispered. "No, Mom," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her touch was no longer cold. It was the warmth of a fire that had finally been tamed. "We handled it." Outside, the sun continued to shine on a Tuesday afternoon. But for the first time in 22 years, I wasn't afraid of the shadows. Because I knew who was controlling the light. The phone on the kitchen counter began to shriek again almost immediately after I hung up. It was a frantic, rhythmic buzzing, the sound of a trapped animal throwing itself against the bars of a cage. I looked at the screen. Mark. He was spiraling, calling back because he had nowhere else to turn, no other ear to pour his lies into. I reached for it, my knuckles white, but a small, firm hand intercepted mine. "Emma." She didn't look at the phone with fear. She looked at it with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a dying specimen. "Let me," she whispered. "He needs to hear it from the person who actually pulled the trigger." I stepped back, my heart hammering a frantic beat against my ribs. I watched my 12-year-old daughter, my vigilante daughter, pick up the device. She didn't swipe with aggression. She did it with the executioner's grace. A smooth, final movement that opened the line to the man who had traded her soul for a down payment. "Hi, Dad," she said. Her voice was terrifyingly level, a calm lake hiding 1,000 fathoms of ice. The silence on the other end was heavy. Then a jagged, broken sob broke through. "Emma? Emma, baby, listen to me. Your mother. She's not thinking clearly. Someone is hacking me. Someone is trying to ruin us. You have to tell her to stop. You have to help me." Emma leaned against the kitchen island, her eyes tracking the scrolling data on her laptop screen. "Nobody is hacking you, Dad," she said, her tone almost conversational. "I'm just auditing you. There's a difference." "Audit? What are you talking about?" "Emma, I'm your father. I'm at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere, and the police are circling the parking lot. I have no money. I have nothing." "You have exactly what you earned," Emma countered. She hit a key on her laptop, and I saw a screen flicker with text message logs, blue and green bubbles that held the anatomy of a betrayal. "I know about the second phone, Dad. The one you kept in the lining of your gym bag. The one you used to tell Rebecca that Mom was stagnant water, and that I was just an expense you were tired of paying." "Emma, that was just talk," Mark stammered, his voice thin and pathetic. "I didn't mean it." "You meant the $75,000, she said, and the air in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You meant the forged mortgage application. You meant the way you used my social security number as collateral because you thought I was too young to have a voice. I've been monitoring everything, Dad. Every email. Every private browser tab. I even know that Rebecca started seeing someone else 3 days ago. A junior partner at her firm. She was going to leave you the moment the Florida house was in her name. You weren't even the lead in your own heist. You were just the fall guy." The sound that came through the phone was a hollow, animalistic groan. It was the sound of a man realizing he was utterly, completely alone in a world he had tried to conquer. "How?" he whispered. "How could you do this to me? I'm your father." Emma stood up straight then, her small frame silhouetted against the bright afternoon light. She looked at me for a split second, and in that gaze I saw the funeral of her childhood. The girl who loved fairy tales was gone. The woman who understood consequences had taken her place. You taught me a very important lesson, Dad, she said, her voice echoing in the silent kitchen. You taught me that the people who are supposed to protect you sometimes don't. You taught me that love can be a mask for greed. So, I took the only logical step. She paused, her finger hovering over the end call button. I protected us, she said, because you were the one we needed protection from. Emma, please. Don't hang up. I'm sorry. I'll come home. We can fix. There is no home to come back to, Mark, Emma interrupted, using his name for the first and last time. The locks were changed an hour ago. The police have the fraud files. And Rebecca? She already gave them your private phone to save herself. You're not a father anymore. You're just a case number. She swiped the screen. The silence that followed was irreversible. It wasn't just the end of a phone call. It was the final severance of a 22-year-old cord. Emma laid the phone face down on the granite. She didn't collapse. She didn't cry. She just walked over to the sink, rinsed her cereal bowl, and placed it neatly in the dishwasher. I watched her, a lump in my throat so large I couldn't swallow. I wanted to tell her it was okay to be a child, but I knew that was a lie I could no longer afford. She had saved us, but she had used the pieces of her own innocence to build the armor. Emmy, I whispered. She turned to me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the 12-year-old girl again, the one who was scared and tired and wanted to wake up from a nightmare. She stepped into my arms, and I held her so tight I could feel her heart beating against mine. It's over, Mom, she murmured into my shoulder. I know, baby, I said, tears finally spilling over. I know. Outside, the sirens were probably getting closer to that rest stop on I-95. Mark was facing a world without credit, without a home, and without the family he had deemed dead weight. But inside our house, the air was finally starting to clear. The executioner's grace had done its work. The predator was gone. And though our lives were in ruins for the first time in a decade, the ruins belonged entirely to us. The waiting room of Dr. Patricia Reeves' office smelled of lavender and expensive neutrality. It was a space designed to absorb the jagged edges of broken families, decorated in soothing teals and creams that felt like a polite apology for the world's cruelty. I sat on the edge of a velvet chair, my purse clutched in my lap like a shield, watching Emma. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't kicking her heels against the chair or staring at her phone with the frantic escapism of most 12-year-olds. She was reading a technical manual on cybersecurity, a dense, dry book that looked utterly absurd in the hands of a girl wearing a sweater with a small embroidered kitten on the collar. Emma Patterson? Dr. Reeves was a woman of soft angles and sharp eyes. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that searched for the cracks behind the porcelain. We followed her into an office that felt like a plush sanctuary. Emma sat down in a large armchair, her small frame swallowed by the fabric, yet she didn't look diminished. She looked like a queen regent granting an audience. So Emma, Dr. Reeves began, her voice a gentle lilt. Your mom tells me things have been very chaotic at home. Your father left and there's been some financial difficulty. How are you feeling about everything? I braced myself. I expected the dam to break. I expected the weeks of staccato rhythm and digital warfare to culminate in a messy, guttural sob. I wanted her to cry. I needed her to be a child again, if only for an hour. Emma tilted her head, considering the question with a clinical resilience that made my heart ache. I feel fine, Dr. Reeves, Emma said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the tremors that still haunted my own speech. Actually, I feel satisfied. Dr. Reeves paused, her pen hovering over a legal pad. Satisfied? That's an interesting word for such a painful situation. Most children feel sad or angry, or even guilty when a parent leaves. I was angry at first, Emma admitted, her gaze shifting to the window. But anger is inefficient. It doesn't recover stolen assets. It doesn't stop identity theft. Once I realized that Dad had commodified my identity, I stopped viewing him as a parent and started viewing him as a security breach. I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. Security breach. She was talking about her father like he was a line of corrupted code. Emma, I whispered, reaching for her hand. She let me take it, but her palm was dry and still. It's okay to be sad. He's your dad. He broke our hearts. He broke a contract, Mom, Emma said, turning to me. There was no malice in her eyes, only a terrifying crystal clarity. A father is supposed to provide protection and stability. He chose to provide debt and abandonment. By the laws of logic, the title of father no longer applies. Therefore, there is no grief. Only the resolution of a problem. Dr. Reeves looked at me, then back at Emma. Emma, do you miss the soft things? The movie nights? The way he used to make you pancakes on Sundays? Emma's expression softened for a fraction of a second, a brief flicker of the girl she used to be before the armored childhood took over. I missed the person I thought he was. But that person was a fabrication. Missing a lie is just another form of self-deception. I'd rather be safe than comforted by a ghost. The session continued for 40 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Emma explained her shadow link, with the same pride a student might explain a science project. She talked about the scrub phase, and the way she dismantled Rebecca's life with the detached satisfaction of a master weaver finishing a tapestry. When Emma was asked to wait in the lobby, Dr. Reeves turned to me. The professional mask had slipped. She looked genuinely shaken. Barbara, she said softly, your daughter is exceptional. Her IQ is likely in the top percentile. But what we're seeing here is a profound intellectualization of trauma. She hasn't bypassed the pain. She's built a fortress around it out of logic and data. Is she damaged? I asked, the word catching in my throat. She is changed, Dr. Reeves corrected. Mark didn't just steal her money, Barbara. He stole her softness. He forced her to trade her innocence for competence. She's developed a survival mechanism that is incredibly functional, but it has cost her the ability to be vulnerable. I walked out of the office and found Emma in the hallway. She was standing by a window, watching a young father pick up his toddler and spin her around. Emma wasn't smiling. She was observing them like an anthropologist studying a dying species. In that moment, the weight of the betrayal hit me with a new, agonizing force. Mark had left me with a broken heart, but he had left Emma with an armored childhood. He had forced a 12-year-old girl to become an executioner because her protector had turned into a thief. She turned to me as I approached, her face sliding back into that mask of clinical resilience. Are we done, Mom? She asked. I have some updates on the credit restoration files to run when we get home. I looked at her. At the girl who could hack a bank but couldn't bring herself to cry for a lost father. I realized that the satisfaction she felt was her only way of keeping the darkness at bay. If she stopped being a soldier, she would have to admit she was a victim. And Emma Patterson refused to be a victim. Yes, sweetheart, I said, pulling her close. I kissed the top of her head, smelling the vanilla shampoo that was the last lingering trace of her childhood. We're done for today. As we walked to the car, I realized that I had spent the last week calling her a hero. And she was. But the price of that heroism was the loss of soft things. I was raising a girl who knew how to destroy a man's life before she'd even had her first kiss. Mark had wanted to leave us with nothing. Instead, he'd left me with a daughter who was a genius, a protector, and a stranger. Mom, Emma said as I started the engine. Yes, baby. Don't be sad about what Dr. Reeves said, she whispered, looking out at the passing trees. Innocence is just a lack of information. I'm not lesser because I know the truth now. I'm just harder to hurt. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. She was right. She was harder to hurt. But as we drove away from the lavender-scented office, I wept silently for the girl who used to think that was a bad thing. 6 months had passed, and the world outside our small sun-drenched apartment was screaming with the echoes of a scandal that had refused to die. The Rebecca Sterling case wasn't just a local headline anymore. It had become a national obsession, a cautionary tale of white-collar greed and the anonymous genius who had dismantled it. News anchors spoke of a digital ghost, who had provided the FBI with thousands of encrypted files, leading to 13 arrests across 3 states. Rebecca was awaiting sentencing. Mark was a shadow, a man whose name was now synonymous with cautionary tale in every financial fraud database in the country. He was effectively erased, a ghost haunting the fringes of a society that no longer accepted his currency. But inside our home the air was quiet. I was sitting at the kitchen table watching Emma. She was 13 now, but the armored childhood Dr. Reeves had spoken of had settled into something more refined, something I could only describe as an altruistic fire. She wasn't just a soldier anymore. She was an architect of a different kind. Mom, Emma said, not looking up from her dual monitor setup. Secure Family Tech just sent another follow-up. They've increased the offer. I leaned over her shoulder. The email was glowing with corporate desperation. A youth development position. A full scholarship to any university in the world. A starting salary of $120,000. Signing bonus included. That's a lot of money, Emmy, I whispered. It was more than I earned in 4 years at the library. It was the kind of security most people spent their entire lives chasing. It was a golden parachute for a girl who had survived a plane crash. Emma scrolled through the contract, her eyes reflecting the legalese with a cold, analytical detachment. They don't want to help people, Mom. They want to patent my Shadowlink protocols. They want to sell protection to the highest bidder. If I sign this, I'm just building a better cage for someone else to hold the key to. She hit the delete key. The $120,000 offer vanished into the digital ether without a second thought. What are you going to do instead? I asked, though I already knew. I had seen the folders she'd been building late at night, folders not labeled for retribution but for rescue. I'm starting the Phoenix Initiative, she said. She clicked a button and a new website flared to life. The logo was a stylized bird rising from a bed of binary code. A legacy redefined. It's a nonprofit, Mom. I've already secured the 501(c)(3) status. I'm going to provide free forensic auditing and identity restoration for minors whose parents have used their social security numbers for fraud. I've already had 42 inquiries this week. I sat down, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of her transformation. My daughter, the girl who had been robbed of her own name, was now the patron saint of the betrayed. She was the phoenix of the digital age, rising from the ashes of Mark's greed to ensure that no other child had to become a monster just to survive their own father. Emma, you're 13, I said, a mix of pride and a lingering motherly fear. You have a whole life ahead of you. You don't have to carry the world's secrets on your shoulders. I'm already carrying them, Mom, she said, finally turning to look at me. The clinical resilience was still there, but it was tempered by something warmer now. A sense of purpose that made her seem taller, older, more grounded. I can't unknow what I know. I can't pretend there aren't thousands of kids out there whose protectors are actually predators. If I have the tools to stop them, isn't it a crime if I don't? I looked at her, and I saw a woman I barely recognized but deeply admired. She had taken the 0 in her soul and turned it into a binary sun. She was no longer just a victim of Mark's theft. She was the architect of his irrelevance. How do we start? I asked. Emma smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. It was the first soft thing I had seen in months. I've already drafted the volunteer handbook. And Mom? I'm going to need a director of operations. Someone who knows how to handle the human side of the grief, while I handle the data. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was firm, a silent promise. We're going to help them, Mom. We're going to make sure that when a house dies, the children inside don't have to die with it. I looked at the screen at the list of names, kids from Ohio, California, Texas, all reaching out into the dark for a hand to pull them back. I thought of the dead weight Mark had called us. I thought of the suitcase and the zip, and the sun hemorrhaging gold on our bedroom floor. That life was a whistleblower's ghost now. It had no power over us. Okay, I said, my voice steady and full of an altruistic fire that mirrored her own. Let's get to work. Emma turned back to her monitors, her fingers beginning that familiar rhythmic tap-tap-tap. But this time it didn't sound like a surgeon's scalpel. It sounded like a pulse. It sounded like life. The morning air was crisp, tasting of renewal and the sharp, clean scent of rain-washed pavement. I stood on the sidewalk of our new neighborhood, a place of modest brick apartments and sturdy oak trees that didn't hold the ghosts of 22 years of lies. This was the dawn after the theft, a quiet, unassuming Tuesday that felt more like a victory than any anniversary ever had. I watched Emma. She was standing at the bus stop, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She wasn't hunched over a laptop. She was talking to a younger girl, a 6th grader who looked nervous about a math test. Emma was leaning in, her expression gentle, offering a piece of advice that made the younger girl smile. The armored childhood hadn't disappeared, but it had evolved. The steel was still there, but Emma had learned how to drape it in silk. She was a protector now, not just of our bank accounts but of the people around her. "Ready, Mom?" Emma called out, noticing me watching. "Ready," I said, walking over to join her. As we waited, my phone chimed with a news alert. A final pathetic footnote to the scandal that had once consumed us. Mark Patterson, former accountant charged with felony identity theft and financial fraud. The article didn't need to say what I already knew through Emma's occasional status checks. Mark was living in the very car he had used to drive away from us. Because of the fraudulent activity flags Emma had woven into his global credit file, he couldn't pass a background check for an apartment. No landlord would touch him. No firm would hire him. He was a man with a suitcase and a car seat, parked in the lot of a 24-hour gym just to use the showers. His new life with Rebecca had ended before it began. She had traded her testimony against him for a reduced sentence, blaming him for every decimal point she'd ever moved. He was the architect of his own exile. He had tried to leave us as dead weight, but he was the one currently drifting, unmoored and unwanted. It was the quiet triumph of the outsmarted. "He called again last night, didn't he?" Emma asked, her eyes fixed on the approaching yellow bus. "He left a voicemail," I admitted. He sounded small. He wanted to know if we could talk about the equity in the old house. "There is no equity for him," Emma said, her voice a calm, unbreakable line. "The court ordered restitution for the college fund and the fraudulent loans consumed his entire share. He's looking for a ghost, Mom. He hasn't realized yet that we aren't there anymore." The bus pulled up with a hiss of brakes. Emma stepped onto the first stair, then paused and turned back to me. The morning sun caught the gold in her hair, and for a moment I saw the toddler she used to be, the one who was afraid of the dark. But then she straightened her shoulders, and I saw the woman she was becoming, a person of such profound strength that it made my breath hitch. "I love you, Mom," she said. "I love you too, Emmy." The bus pulled away, and I stood on the curb, watching it disappear around the corner. I thought about Dr. Reeves and her worries about us being broken pieces. She was wrong. We weren't shards of a shattered life waiting to be glued back together. We were an unbreakable alloy, forged in the furnace of Mark's betrayal. The fire hadn't destroyed us. It had burnt away the impurities, leaving behind something harder, sharper, and infinitely more valuable. I walked back toward our apartment, my steps light and purposeful. I thought about the house we'd lost, the one with the mahogany furniture and the $0 balance. It was a beautiful cage, and Mark had been the warden. Now I was the director of operations for a nonprofit that was changing lives. Emma was a pioneer of digital justice. We had a small balcony with potted herbs and a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon instead of ash. We had a future that wasn't tied to a man's whims or a mistress's greed. Mark had made a choice in that sun-drenched bedroom 6 months ago. He had looked at the life we'd built and decided it wasn't enough. He had reached for a fantasy and let go of the only real things he ever owned. He chose his mistress. We chose our future. And as I opened the door to our home, I knew who had won. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the very end. Sharing these stories of betrayal and resilience is never easy, but knowing you are here makes it worth it. If Barbara and Emma's journey touched a nerve in your heart, I would be honored to have you as part of our community. Please consider subscribing to Queen's Revenge, so we can continue to stand for justice together. Your support is the strength behind every word I write.